All right, let me get myself front and center here. Hopefully everyone can hear and see me okay. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see everyone's here. Hopefully we're all going well. Hopefully we're all enduring this whole quarantine thing as best as we can, and that we're all soldiering on with our studies and just trying to make the best out of this entire situation, really. Oh, look at all the good mornings in the chat. Oh, that's so lovely. It makes me so happy. Okay. Wonderful. So, guys, what's the game plan for today? What are we going to be doing? Actually, sorry, just before I do get started, guys, I don't know why, but I've, for the past 2 days, it just seems to be an issue with my audio. I don't know why. I either turn into a robot where it sounds like someone is muting me like really, really, really fast. Or apparently I just blast white noise, like static, which... So if something like that does happen, please let me know as soon as you can, and I'll try my best to fix it. I think I know the cause. I just haven't been able to sort of properly fix it yet. Okay, this should be everything. Okay, I'm trying something different too, just to help with, again, audio quality. And a bit of the feedback that we did get from last week, just sort of talking about separating the audio and the video. So you do have an audio only option. So I'm actually just going to be recording the audio sort of independently, just so it's a little bit better quality and I can work with it a little bit more. But anyway, moving forward. Oh, excuse me. We are going to be continuing on with our journey of the kidney and on the nephron. So where we sort of finished up last week was we were looking at sort of the raw anatomical structure in terms of, looking at the renal cortex and looking at the renal medulla. Sorry, I need to shuffle myself over a little bit. There we go. Like the renal cortex, the renal medulla. We're looking at those cool little renal pyramids and columns, and then we were looking at the juxtamedullary and cortical nephrons, and then we really dug deep and spent a lot of time talking about the nephron itself. Okay, so we're talking about that glomerular capillaries there, and the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule. We were then talking about, the proximal convoluted tubules, the Lupert-Hanley distal convoluted tubules, and the collecting duct. And we were sort of, not only were we obviously going through and being able to draw or label a nephron, we spent a lot of time talking about what it does. Like, what's the point? Sorry, let me go to this one. Like, why do we care about this? Like, nephrons, okay, cool, yeah, it's a bit of a squiggly pipe that connects to something. Who cares, right? Why are we spending this time and effort and going through that? And we really sort of dug deep in looking at how it's so important to be able to sort of filter the blood through and then reabsorb all of those important substances that we want to get back into our bloodstream, that we don't want to release as waste. And it allows us to sort of go, do we actually want all of this? Do we need, I just, here's my drink bottle, right? And I just drank 5 of those, right? That'd be 4 liters maybe. Do I need an additional 4 liters of water, of liquid in my body right now? No, absolutely not. So that's where the kidneys would be able to then go, hey, well, we don't actually need all of this. Like, yeah, sure, some will be reabsorbed, but we don't need all of it. Let's get rid of some. And basically it means I will be peeing like a champion for the next few hours. Oh dear. Now, where do I want to go? I think I'm feeling top left today. Let's do that. So, what we're going to be doing now is exploring that whole fluid balance thing in a little bit more depth, a little bit more detail. Now, this is going to come back to, again, what I was saying yesterday about that fluid reabsorption. We don't want to create, 170, 180 liters of urine a day. That's ridiculous. It's just non-compatible with life. Let's just say that. And it's also going to link back to our looking at our capillaries and looking at that bulk flow and looking at how we can move and exchange fluid between our plasma in our capillaries with our like interstitial fluid there, that interstitial space, so the space surrounding the tissues. And then something we haven't spoken about too much, but we're going to talk about a little bit more today, is the exchange of fluid then between the ECF, or that interstitial space, and the ICF, that intracellular fluid, and how it's a big sort of balancing game. So, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about these fluid compartments. We're going to be talking about some hormonal control as well. That's going to be very, very important. We're going to be talking about some major electrolytes. Now, again, the physiological importance of major electrolytes, we've kind of already done that. Yeah, we've spoken a lot about sodium and potassium and calcium and stuff like that when we were talking about action potentials with our skeletal muscle and our cardiomyocytes and our pacemaker cells. So you guys are already experts on that. A chemical buffer system, we've touched on it, but you guys have actually sort of taken it one step further with like a chemical buffer system and what we mean by acid-base balance. We actually did that when we were doing the lungs, okay? When we were talking about hemoglobin and looking at that binding affinity of oxygen and the Bohr effect and all that sort of stuff. So, a lot of these things, like the fluid compartments, major electrolytes, chemical buffers, and acid and bases, you guys have actually already done quite a lot of this. So I know week 5 when we were doing lungs, and it was a full-on week. Yeah, there was a lot on. You guys are sort of reaping what you sow there. You guys are now being rewarded by that because a lot of this stuff is going to actually be familiar, which is fantastic. It's really good. Now, I'm not going to bother about the case study. I'm going to reserve that for the tutorial. Oh, pardon me. Now, body fluid. We are not just compact and dense forms of matter that have no water and no moisture. Okay, we have an incredible amount of water in the body, and obviously this changes depending on your age and your to put it nicely, your tissue composition, okay? Basically how fat you are, or how fit you are as well. How much muscle do you have? Just talking about muscle and all of that, I know a lot of bodybuilders, especially those who are at the very high end, like sort of really competing, when they need to go on stage and sort of like, flex and stuff like that, they actually dehydrate themselves leading up to a competition so that they lose a lot of that water, and it actually gives them a more muscle tone, muscle definition. It's absolutely not very healthy and something you really shouldn't do, especially long term. But yeah, it depends very much on, how much muscle, how much fat you have, how big you are as a person. Like, are you, I think I'm like 6 foot or 6'1", or are you 4'2"? That's, it's going to change how much water you have, obviously. Now, when we're talking about bodily fluids or body fluids here, we're not obviously talking about just water. Like, we don't just have pure water and that is it. There is obviously a lot of things that are dissolved and moving around in this water. So, we have non-electrolytes and we do have electrolytes. Now, what do we mean by a non-electrolyte, or these organic molecules that do not dissociate in water? I'm going to try and keep this exceptionally brief because this is a chemistry thing. But essentially, what dissociation is explaining, and we covered this when we were talking about the lungs and hemoglobin and oxygen. So if something was to dissociate, it is to remove or be sort of disconnected. Where, and the opposite with that would be association, that is to bind or to attach. Now, when you put something into water, just as an example, if it is ionically bound, now what I mean by that is that if it is a metal and a non-metal atom bound together, what will happen is that they will dissociate. They will split apart in water. Now, an example of this is table salt. Okay, so table salt is sodium chloride, NaCl. Now, sodium is a metal. Yeah, it's a very, very reactive metal. For those of you who have never sort of seen sodium, if you actually cut a bit off, it will instantly sort of react with the oxygen and water around you, just in the air. And if you actually take that and throw it into water, it'll actually catch on fire and explode, which is always great fun for junior chemistry classes. I definitely did not nearly set fire to my poor high school chemistry, the roof, because I threw in too much sodium. But that's a story for a different day. We'll just move on from that. And chlorine is a non-metal, and chlorine it's a gas, very, very toxic, very poisonous. Sodium, again, if you were to turn around and bite on a big chunk of sodium, wouldn't recommend it. It's a big chunk of metal, and even though it is quite soft, it reacts with metal and explodes. Okay, that's bad. Chlorine, it's a very, very toxic gas. Believed it was used in World War I as a toxic gas. Yet, if you put those two things together, you get table salt, which just it just blows my mind. Yeah, that's what you put on food. That's what you put on hot chips, and you enjoy it. It's great. Now, to come back to my original point, I got a wee bit sidetracked there. What I'm saying here is that if it is an electrolyte, or if it is this ionic molecule, a metal and a non-metal, it will dissociate and split apart and dissolve in water. Whereas if it is a organic molecule, so if we've got, say, glucose and lipids, this isn't a metal and a non-metal. These are non-metals. They won't split apart and they won't dissolve. Sorry, I'm just going to close my blinds, guys. That's just really glary. Give me one moment. That's a bit better. Sorry about that, everyone. So when we're looking at our body fluids here, we're looking at things that are dissolved in water, and they may dissociate and they may not dissociate, obviously depending on what the molecule is. Now, just to come back to table salt, how I said that dissociates. When we eat table salt, you sort of get your hot chips and you put some table salt on there, cheering, tastes good, yum yum. Then that is eating sodium chloride. But this entire time, I have not been referring to anything in the body as sodium chloride. I've referred to it as sodium ions or chlorine ions, and that's because the word ion means it's an atom that contains a charge, but it also means that sodium and that chlorine have split apart. So that is why we talked about them sort of separately in that context. Now, fluid compartments. Again, we are all experts on this because we have discussed this already in great depth. There are two sort of main compartments, which I thought I had a different image. Never mind. So we have two main compartments that we can basically classify things: intracellular or extracellular. Now, this is very sort of clear cut. It's very straightforward. Is this fluid, and this is across the entire body, is this fluid inside of a cell or is it outside of a cell? If it's inside of the cell, we'll call it ICF, intracellular fluid. And if it's outside of the cell, it's ECF, extracellular fluid. Now, as we are already aware, with extracellular fluid, we can further divide that down. We have our interstitial fluid, which this is fluid that is outside of the cell, but surrounds the cell, surrounds the tissues. It's not like you have cells and they're just, again, bone dry. There's nothing around them. But there's another one here, and that is our intravascular. Now, again, intravascular, inside, vascular, our vascular network, our blood vessels. So that's just referring to our blood plasma. So the main compartments of fluid, we have our ICF, and within the category of the ECF, we have our interstitial fluid and our blood plasma. And this part here was where our bulk flow was involved when we were looking at that fluid exchange within the capillaries. Now, just in terms of ratios, about 2/3 of our fluid are located within the cells and 1/3 is located outside. Okay, now, when we're looking at these fluid compartments, and as we've already discussed about this, here we go, in great depth, is that fluid doesn't just sit there. It doesn't just chill out and just do nothing, okay? There is this a constant exchange that is happening here. And again, we spoke about that when we were talking about bulk flow. But there are only two places in which we see exchange between these compartments. Oh, hiccups already. My apologies. Now, I want to be clear here. That's between the compartments, okay? So this is if you want to move fluid from ICF to interstitial, or, interstitial to the blood vessels, that sort of stuff. So the first one, as I sort of gave it away, the cell membranes. Now, the cell membrane is what separates the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell. So if you want fluid to be exchanged between the ICF and the interstitial space, then it's going to have to pass through the cell membrane. And the next one is the capillary walls, which is that's our bulk flow. It has to go through that capillary walls to go from the sort of the bloodstream into that interstitial space. Now, this water movement, wrong button. There we go. This water movement between compartments is incredibly important because the body is constantly playing a balancing game. It's constantly trying to make sure that everything has the right amount of fluid in every spot that it needs. Now, looking over here at this very, very thirsty lady, what she's doing is she's taking a massive drink of water. Okay, that's all well and good. But if, say, she's incredibly dehydrated, and she's, needs more fluid, how does it get to where it needs to go? So let's say that this lady here is incredibly dehydrated. We'll stick to this one. What's going to happen is, if she's incredibly dehydrated, we might start to notice that within the bloodstream, it's not as watery, okay? It's getting a bit more viscous. It's getting a little bit thicker because there's less water in here. So what's going to happen is, as we discussed with bulk flow, because there's not as much hydrostatic pressure there, it's going to then rely upon that colloid osmotic pressure, and it's going to pull water from the interstitial space here into that bloodstream. Okay, that's all well and good. Now, what is also going to happen then is that the osmolarity of that interstitial space is then going to change. It's going to increase. And what is that going to do? Well, it's going to pull water outside of the cells. Okay, it's going to pull the water from the ICF into this interstitial space, which means the cells might shrink a little bit. And this is perfectly normal within reason, of course. And then what can happen from there is that will then balance out the movement of water between our cells and the surrounding space. And it could then move again from that interstitial space into our bloodstream. Now, that's what can happen during, say, dehydration. Now, again, this lady, let us call her Susan. Okay, Susan here has a big old drink of water. She has a massive, massive drink of water. So suddenly, as that passes through our GI tract here in the stomach, the duodenum, and suddenly it's getting absorbed. Where does it get absorbed? Well, it's moving from the GIT into that hepatic portal system. It's then traveling to the liver, blah blah blah. But it's moving into our bloodstream. If that moves then into our bloodstream, we have a much higher hydrostatic pressure, which means more of that water is going to be pushed into this interstitial space. Now, if we have more water in in this interstitial space, it's going to lower that osmolarity, and it's going to mean that more water is going to want to move from this interstitial space into the cells. And that means the cells are then going to have more water in them. They're going to swell up, okay? They're going to become rehydrated. And look, the big thing I'm really trying to communicate, the big thing I'm really trying to sort of explain to you guys here is that it never just is one thing and one thing only. It is a constant backwards and forwards. It is constant. Like, you have a drink of water, it moves into the blood, moves into the interstitial space, moves into the cells. You don't have a drink for an hour or 3 because you left your drink bottle at home. So the fluid moves out of the cells into this interstitial space and back into the bloodstream. And it's a constant balancing act depending on how hydrated you are or depending on your body's needs. Because again, if you're doing a lot of strenuous exercise and you're sweating a lot, you're going to lose a lot of water and you're going to dehydrate. Okay, what are we saying here? Now, body water gain and loss. Okay, so obviously, how do we find water? How do we get water into our body? And where does it go? Where does it disappear to? So, we gain water from ingestion. This makes sense, okay? This is coming back to the whole, I've got a drink bottle. See how I segued that to get a nice sip of water? Isn't that smooth? So, have a nice drink of water. Brilliant. What did I do? I just ingested some of that liquid. I've got some more water in me. I'm a happy man. That's fantastic. That is not the only source, however. We can also get it, obviously, from food. So, and I'm sure we've had this, all of us, we eat a food that's just really dry. And it just feels as though it's just sucking all the moisture out of your mouth, and you're like, bleh. Okay. So a lot of the foods that we consume also have water in them. And one other one that a lot of people don't actually really aware of is our metabolism. So many of sort of the chemical reactions that we have occurring in our body, a lot of them are what are called sort of condensation reactions. And what that is when two molecules, say, bind together, it will then release water as a byproduct. So what will happen is, by your body sort of doing its usual chemical reactions, to sort of keep you guys alive, which is good. That's definitely what we want. What's going to happen is it creates water as a byproduct, and then our body goes, hey, sweet, more water. Let's use it. That's dope. So these are the main ways in which we gain water. This is how we get water in our body. Now, how we lose water. Now, most people, again, will have a consistent loss of water as urine, because as we discussed last week, we use those nephrons there to filter our blood. We use urine to help remove waste. Now, we also have a loss of fluid in our feces, okay, in sweating. Hopefully not too much water loss in tears or anything like that, guys. Hopefully there's none of that. Hopefully there's no water loss with tears, okay? We'll take happy tears, but no sad tears, all right? Now, we also obviously have water loss by sweat, okay? If you're sweating profusely, you can lose a lot of water in that way, and that's, a lot of our higher end athletes, that's a really big thing. Pardon me, guys, I've got like a dry cough. Now, even if you try your best to retain as much water as possible, it is inevitable that you will lose some water just through your skin, okay? Just through pure evaporation. And a big, for you guys, probably won't be as bad. For me, a huge source of water loss is talking. I talk a lot because it's my job to talk. And I will have to always have a drink bottle with me because, and again, as we discussed this in lungs, by me breathing in, what I am doing is I am humidifying all of that air. So I'm putting moisture into that air as I'm breathing it into my lungs. That's all well and good, but then when I breathe it out, I can't take that water back out of out of my breath. This is why if you breathe on a window, it'll fog up. So what happens is, by me talking so much throughout the day, I actually lose quite a lot of water just as moisture through my breath. And I do actually need to constantly keep drinking more and more water, otherwise I will get very, very dehydrated. Okay, I did have this graph. Okay, this is what I was looking for here. So this is a cool little schematic here of just how your body gains and loses water. So essentially, the body is trying to maintain a body fluid osmolarity of 280 to 300 milliosmol. So what is that telling you? So again, osmolarity is the molarity, so concentration per volume of sort of dissolved solutes that create like an osmotic gradient. Do I expect you to remember that 280 or 300 milliosmol? Yeah. The inner chemist in me would be pretty happy with that. But it's not hugely essential. But the big thing is that it's having it at this value. That's what controls this backwards and forwards that we were describing. That we were describing over here. So if we remove a lot of water, say from this this interstitial space, because there's less water, that osmolarity is going to get higher, and it's going to drag water out of these cells. So it's this osmolarity that we're talking about here that controls that movement of water. So our input, we have metabolism. So that's what I was explaining before with the just the body's chemical reactions that are occurring. Food, beverages, that's our input. Output, feces, sweat, insensible loss via skin and lungs. That's one way to put it. Basically sweating, breathing, that sort of stuff. And of course, urine. Urine is our main output. Now, these volumes here are obviously very roundabout. Okay, they change extensively depending on you as a person and depending on what you're doing. I can tell you right now, I have way more than 1,500 mils a day. Way more. Okay, so obviously, please take these values with a grain of salt, and just be aware that obviously drinking water, like beverages, is our main way of getting water in, which makes sense, and urine is the main way of getting liquid out. Now, osmolarity, this is what I was explaining before. This is the total number of particles in a solution, sure. But it's essentially looking at these dissolved atoms. So it's like I was saying to you guys, like sodium and chlorine, okay? If that splits apart, okay, that's referring to our osmolarity. And that is what drives this osmotic gradient and allows that water to sort of move. Looking at blood sodium, blood potassium, would I expect you guys to know these values? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But what we're looking at here is osmosis, which, that's better. Which we should all be absolute experts at when we were doing this with bulk flow. So if we're looking at our ICF and our ECF over here, if we suddenly lose a big chunk of our ECF, so ECF, extracellular fluid, so this could be either in the blood, this could either be in our interstitial fluid, we don't know, but it's kind of irrelevant. But we could, let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say we, as our good, responsible, healthcare students, you go down, you donate blood or you donate plasma. Okay, let's say you go down to Red Cross and you donate some of your blood plasma. So what can happen there is that your ECF would sharply decrease. So what's going to happen there is that's going to make this more hypertonic, okay? And what that is going to do then is it's going to pull water from your ICF, so from the inside of the cells, into this ECF and balance everything out. I'm obviously going to be a bit quite brief with that part because we've discussed it a lot in depth. But guys, again, I keep looking over at the chat there. If you guys are still a bit confused with, osmosis and movement of water and all that sort of stuff, please let me know. Okay, I'm happy to recap and cover it again. Now, this slide here. Whoops. Yeah, kind of fit there. Looking at this tonicity, so hypertonicity, isotonicity, and hypotonicity. What is this describing here? What we are essentially looking at there is what I was describing here. Oh, excuse me. So how we were looking at movement of water, is it moving into the cells or is it moving out of the cell? That here, that's what we are looking at here. Now, there's a really cool experiment that we do in health science in a course that I teach called CTR, Cells, Tissues, and Regulation. And what we do is we get a small sample of, say, sheep's blood that we can see those red blood cells, and we put varying concentrations of salty water on them. And what you can actually do is you can actually observe this happening. So our physiological osmolarity, the salt solution is 0.9%. Okay, that's what we run at. So if you were to put a 0.9% salt solution onto these red blood cells, what you have made is an isotonic solution. And what that essentially means is water going to move into those red blood cells? Yes. Is water going to move out of those red blood cells? Yes. But what's going to be the net movement? What's going to happen is the amount of water moving in is going to be the exact same as the amount of water moving out, which means it stays the same. Now, let's say I suddenly, I don't make a 0.9% salt solution. I accidentally put the decimal point in the wrong spot and I make a 9% salt solution, which is ridiculously salty. What that will do is it will actually create this very high osmotic gradient, and it's going to pull water out of those red blood cells. And you can see them starting to sort of shrivel and shrink in. And that's called crenation. Now, not cremate. Cremate is, the burning of dead bodies. It's crenation. That's the shrinking or shriveling of red blood cells due to, less water being inside them. Now, the last one here is hypotonicity. This is why we don't go, oh my God, someone's dehydrated. Let's just put pure water into them. Because what's going to happen is the opposite of what we saw with hypertonicity. And water is going to just flood into the cell and it won't be able to handle it. It can't hold that much water and it will swell and pop. It will explode. Okay, how are we going, guys? How are we feeling with that so far? Is everything making sense? Is everything sitting well? All right. Hopefully we're going okay, guys. Again, please let me know if you do have any questions. If you're not sure about anything. Yes, awesome, fantastic, lovely. Okay, so what we're going to do now, guys, is that essentially what we've discussed so far is water move in, water move out. Rad, okay? And it is this osmotic gradient that is controlling this water in or water out. Cool. As well as, obviously we need to, ingest water and get rid of it as well. Now, the big question and the big thing that, especially from a sort of a biochemistry perspective, is how do we control that? Well, not even from a biochemistry perspective, even from just sort of like a physiological perspective. It's all well and good to have water move in, water move out, that's rad, but how do we control it? Because let's say water move in. We don't want water to move in, or water move out. Please don't. We don't want water to move out. How do we control these things? This is where these 4 lovely hormones come into play. And guys, you will need to know them. You'll need to know these 4 hormones, and you'll need to know what they do. Now, what do these 4 hormones do? Now, obviously, these are not just exclusively the only 4 hormones in existence. There are obviously many, 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 many more. But these are the big boys. These are the main ones. The first one I want to talk about, before I do that, what these all do is they all control water volume. So what I mean by that, and this is going to link heavily to what we were doing at the very beginning of the course, looking at, blood pressure and blood volume. And that is, if we need to control our blood pressure, we need to control our blood volume. How do we do that? If we need more water to move that, reabsorb it and put it into the blood, so we have essentially more blood, how do we do that? We can control this hormonally via the following 4. The first one we'll talk about, which is released from the posterior pituitary, is called ADH. Now, ADH stands for antidiuretic hormone. Now, what is diuresis? Okay, diuresis is essentially the creation of urine, or generation of urine. So this is why, for those of you who say have a big night out with your friends, and you sort of have a few drinks, what's going to happen is you're going to notice you go to the bathroom a lot. You just pee and pee and pee. And the reason for that is that alcohol is a diuretic. Okay, it increases urine production. So what this hormone does, it is an anti-diuretic hormone. So it helps reduce that diuresis, to reduce the production of urine. And what it does is it inserts a protein that is called aquaporin. Now, if we take this word and we just translate it, aqua, okay, aqueous, water, and porin, the pore, a hole. So it basically, this protein is essentially a little hole like that. It's a water hole. And what it is that protein will actually embed itself in the distal convoluted tubules and on the collecting duct of your nephron. And what that means is that those holes will grab and reabsorb more and more and more water. So instead of it moving across the distal convoluted tubules and straight down into your collecting duct, and once it's out of there, it's in the renal sinus, it's in the ureter, and it's going to the bladder, essentially. It's urine. What this does is that it basically says, nope, don't keep going down the collecting duct there. Get reabsorbed, okay? Get reabsorbed from that collecting duct back, back out, being reabsorbed by those, peritubular capillaries there, and put back into our bloodstream. Let's reabsorb it. Let's not release that as waste. The next one I'm going to talk about a whole lot in a moment, and that is aldosterone. Okay, this is we're going to talk about this a lot because it is a part of the RAS system, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. Now, aldosterone, what it does is it stimulates the sodium-potassium ATPase pumps in the distal convoluted tubules and in our collecting ducts. Now, that's all well and good, and what it does is it increases reabsorption of sodium. Okay. Why is that important for water movement? Well, here's the thing. As I've described over here, how do we move water? It's via osmosis. So if we are moving a huge amount of salt, a huge amount of sodium, water is going to want to follow it. It's going to want to move with that. So by moving and reabsorbing a lot of these salts, it's helping to reabsorb and move a lot of that water. And the same theory can be applied to our parathyroid hormone down here, except instead of sodium, it is calcium. Now, big thing I want to make extraordinarily clear. With these 3 hormones, with antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone, and parathyroid hormone, they all have the same, overall effect, although different means. Their overall effect is that it is going to increase blood volume. How? Because it's reabsorbing water. And by having more volume, you're going to increase blood pressure. So I need you to be very clear with that, okay? ADH, aldosterone, parathyroid hormone, their overall effects is they are going to increase blood volume and increase blood pressure. Now, the fourth hormone, which you may think I put on a second slide because it didn't fit on this slide, but there's actually another surprisingly good reason why it's on a different slide. And that is because ANP, okay? Atrial natriuretic peptide hormone, ANP. This is the opposite of these three, okay? And that's super important. So atrial natriuretic peptide, so natrium, that's sodium, okay? That's why sodium, the symbol for it is Na, okay? Because its original Latin name was sodium. And uretic, like uresis is a loss of fluid as urine. So what atrial natriuretic peptide does is it increases water and salt excretion. So it gets rid of water. It gets rid of sodium. Okay? It does the opposite to what these three are doing. Okay? This one is sort of reabsorb water, reabsorb sodium, reabsorb calcium, reabsorb water, and hold on to it. This one, okay, ANP is doing the opposite. It's saying, get rid of it. So what is happening here, and this is the first part of this, okay, atrial. Because essentially we have cells in the atria of our heart, and what it's doing is it has these stretch receptors. Okay, so our atria is obviously stretching, and it's then constricting down and pushing blood from atria into the ventricle, something we've discussed a whole heck of a lot about. But what is happening is, let's say it stretches, cool, it stretches, okay, and it stretches. And it keeps stretching like that, and it's like, okay, that's a lot of pressure. We're stretching a whole heck of a lot right now. We don't need to do that much. So what can happen here is that the cells in the atria can release ANP and say, okay, guys, our blood pressure is too high. Okay, our blood pressure is too high. Our blood volume is too high. We don't need to be holding on to this much water. Let's start getting rid of it. Okay, let's start ditching it. So that's what I'm explaining down here. Okay, chronic, so long-term high blood pressure and high volume. These stretch receptors will stretch even more than usual, and it will cause this release of the ANP. And basically, the ANP is going to decrease sodium reabsorption. It's also going to decrease water reabsorption. Okay, which means because we're not reabsorbing as much sodium, we're not reabsorbing as much water, that means that we are going to increase our urine production, which means that we are having a decrease in our blood volume because we're not retaining that all anymore because it's moving through that nephron and we are getting rid of it, which means we are decreasing our blood volume and we are thus decreasing our blood pressure. So let's say you are incredibly dehydrated, okay? You're super duper duper dehydrated. Your body is releasing antidiuretic hormone. It is releasing aldosterone, okay? It's releasing parathyroid hormone. It's going, holy dooly, man, we need to really retain a heap of water. We need to really get that blood pressure up, that blood volume up. And then suddenly you have a massive, 3+ liters of water. You have a huge ingestion of water. Then what can happen is your body will go, okay, stop, let's put the brakes on this. We don't need to be ridiculously hanging on to as much water as we can. Let's get rid of some. All right, so what I want to do, guys, before we move on to RAS is a bit of a tricky cascade, okay? There's a lot of things happening there. So what I'm going to do, guys, let's just have a quick 5-minute breather. Stand up, stretch your legs, grab a drink of water. And what we'll do is when we come back after a sort of around 10-minute break is we will push forward with looking at RAS, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. See you soon, guys. Alrighty, guys, let's get back into it, shall we? Let us resume the thrilling tale of controlling water in our bodies. So, what have we done? We've had a look at 4 very, very important hormones. Okay, and their, I shouldn't say their sole purpose, but a very large role that they play is in control of water balance in that water movement. My neighbor is deciding to cut down trees with a chainsaw. I don't know if you guys can hear that. I hope not, but yeah, sorry. Okay. So now let us look at RAS, okay? Renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. So what is this system? What is it describing? Okay, so essentially this is a hormonal cascade. Okay, interesting. What do we mean by cascade? It's sort of like a domino effect. Like one thing, yeah, you guys can't hear it? Ah, damn, okay. Yeah, sorry guys. I'm hoping it's not too loud. It's not too bad, but yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing I can do there. So yeah, a hormonal cascade is like one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another sort of thing. And what it does, it's stimulated by a decrease in blood volume and thus, blood pressure. But what's important to sort of note here, guys, is that this isn't a very this isn't you stood out of bed too quickly and you got a little bit dizzy, like lightheaded. So boom, your body started to activate this RAS process. No, this is sort of a slower but a long duration effect that we have. So this is if you've sort of your body is noticing like a extended duration in which there is a low blood volume or low blood pressure. Okay, this system will be active. So what's going to happen? What kicks this entire process off? And again, we can see our lovely diagram, okay, of our glomerulus. What kicks this whole thing off is our granular cells. Now, I said last week that granular cells are important because they are located within our afferent arteriole. And I said I'm going to talk about them a whole lot because these cells contain the ability to release renin. So what is happening here is that these afferent arterioles, okay, they can either stretch, let me rephrase that. They can stretch, and they do have these stretch receptors that detect how much it is stretching. And if our blood pressure and blood volume is too low, which can be measured by the degree of stretch that is happening with our afferent arterioles, what will happen then is that these granular cells will release renin, okay? And this renin will obviously go straight into our efferent arteriole there, and it will sort of go into circulation. Now, that's the first stage. Yes, I pressed the right button. Excellent. Now, what is then going to happen is once it then leaves the liver. The liver. I just read the word liver. Once renin leaves the kidney, which that's what we're seeing here. So we've detected low blood pressure and low blood volume. So what is happening is renin is being released from these granular cells and then flowing through into our circulation. What is then going to happen is that renin will then trigger the activation of angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. Now, we need to rewind a little bit here. So, angio, I always get these the wrong way around. I believe angio is Latin, okay? But it's Latin for blood and lymph vessels. Okay, so angio and tensin, like tension. Okay, to increase that pressure. But the thing is, there's a little suffix here, ogen. Okay, if something ends in ogen, typically what that means is that it is inactive. Okay, so like we discussed this a little bit when we were talking about the GIT. We're talking about the stomach. Okay, how we had pepsin and pepsinogen. So if it ends in ogen, it means it's inactive. So what is going to happen is angiotensinogen is being produced and it's being released by the liver. Okay, because the liver obviously can also detect these changes in blood pressure. And what will then happen is that renin will bind and activate or trigger angiotensinogen to be converted and activated into angiotensin 1. So again, to recap, renin is released from the granular cells in our afferent arteriole because it detected a low BP, low blood volume. The liver, which has also detected low blood pressure, low blood volume, will release angiotensinogen. And what will then happen is that angiotensinogen won't do anything by itself, but it needs renin to bind to angiotensinogen to convert it into angiotensin 1. Now, this is important because, this is a multi-system approach. You guys know, like in the movies and stuff like that, how they try to open the big secret door and they need like 2 keys to be turned at the same time to open the door. Think of it like that, okay? It's a way to make sure that, like, this is the intended effect. This is what the body wants to do. It isn't just like the kidney went, whoops, here's some renin, here we go, and kickstarts this whole process. Now, you may think that is the end of this. No. Angiotensin 1, okay, can't have all these ridiculous effects in terms of changing blood pressure and changing blood volume. No, we need to involve another system, and that is the lungs. And what the lungs are going to do is they are going to release an enzyme called ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. Now, what ACE does is it will take angiotensin 1 and it will then convert it from angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Okay? Now, this is where the magic happens. So, renin is released. Angiotensinogen is released. Renin and angiotensinogen work their magic to activate it and turn it into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 then needs to come in contact with ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. And what ACE does is it converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Now, angiotensin 2 has a whole lot of different effects here, okay? It is a potent vasoconstrictor, okay? It is vasoconstricting to increase that blood pressure, okay? It is then having an effect on the kidneys, saying to stop releasing water. Things like, stimulating the posterior pituitary to, release ADH, anti-diuretic hormone, to put those aquaporins into the nephron, in that distal convoluted tubule and in the collecting duct to reabsorb more water, okay? Reabsorb more water, increase blood volume, increase blood pressure. We are vasoconstricting, okay? We're vasoconstricting. Let's increase that blood pressure. The hypothalamic thirst center is triggered, okay? If you've got low blood volume, low blood pressure, hey, we need water, we need volume of something, get some liquid into you. Let's get thirsty, okay? And the last one, okay, the posterior pituitary, this ADH is being released, as I've sort of said before, okay, aquaporins. And what will also happen is that angiotensin 2 can then bind to the adrenal cortex. So remember, the adrenal gland is located just at the top of the kidney. It's like the kidney's little top hat that it wears. And then what that will do is that ADH will cause the release of aldosterone. Remember, we were talking about aldosterone over here, and I said we're going to talk about aldosterone a whole lot more. This is how aldosterone is released. Okay, it is released by angiotensin 2 binding to that adrenal gland there. And then what obviously it's going to do there is it's going to increase sodium reabsorption via active transport. It's then going to, because we're reabsorbing more sodium, we're then going to reabsorb more water. So the effect of all of these things, which again, these are very potent effects, these are very powerful, is that we are then decreasing how much urine we are releasing, because we're trying to retain as much water as we can. We are also trying to maintain our blood volume and blood pressure, because if we have super low blood volume, we can't let our blood pressure just completely plummet. So what do? Well, we're trying to maintain that by vasoconstriction, okay, to increase that blood pressure. We're trying to, again, increase this vascular resistance by vasoconstriction to help get that pressure up. And the last point, which, we're trying to sort of trigger thirst here, is to increase that blood volume by drinking. This is also why, if you've lost a lot of blood, or if you've had a really bad accident, if you go to the hospital, what they will do is they will put you on a saline drip, especially if you've lost a lot of blood, because you need volume, you need liquid, to help really push this stuff around. Now, a very, very, very commonly prescribed medication. I think it's still top 10, definitely. It's the top 10 most prescribed medication in Australia, and that is an ACE inhibitor. So what an ACE inhibitor does, remember, angiotensin converting enzyme, so it converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, and it's angiotensin 2 that does all of these things here. So what this medication will do is, by inhibiting ACE, it means it's significantly reducing the amount of angiotensin 2 that is being released, which means that you're not going to get as much vasoconstriction. You're not going to retain as much water. You're not going to have high, your body trying to increase blood volume and blood pressure. And why this is prescribed? It's for those who have chronic hypertension, for those who have high blood pressure. Because if you have high blood pressure, you do not want this system to be active. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. Yeah, that is super not stopping anytime soon. Guys, is that are we managing with that? I've got noise cancelling headphones, so it's a little bit different for me. Are we handling this okay, or should we take a 10-minute break while that happens? Oh my god, I'm looking at the waveform of this sound and it's brutal. Yeah, guys, is it unbearable on your end, or are we good? A break? Okay, yeah, sorry guys. Let's take a quick 5-minute break and hopefully he'll turn off the chainsaw. If he doesn't stop in 5 minutes, we might just have to Oh? I think he just turned it off. Jokes! Let's keep going, quick! Okay. Now, this lovely flowchart here. This flowchart is a really, really, really good thing. I would recommend that we have a look and follow and memorize this flowchart, okay? Super duper. I would take this flowchart and add on what we discussed over here. Okay, so take all of this, the effects that it has in terms of the effect on these target areas like vasoconstriction, lower urinary output, blah, 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 blah. And then have a look at what the overall effect is across, everything. So again, the stimulus here is that if we have low blood pressure, we have low blood volume, okay, this reduction in blood flow to the kidneys, which is being measured by those stretch receptors in those granular cells in our afferent arterioles. Okay, so that's what's basically being said here. The juxtaglomerular apparatus in the kidneys, okay, that's this. So we can see the juxtaglomerular complex And what that does is it releases renin. Once renin is released, the liver, this part sort of not mentioned down here, so the liver will also detect and measure this this change in blood pressure, this change in blood flow. And what it will then do is it will release angiotensinogen. So angiotensinogen and renin, by their powers combined, will make angiotensin 1. Now, angiotensin 1 will then come in contact with ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme, to form angiotensin 2. Now, angiotensin 2 obviously is a very potent vasoconstrictor to help increase that peripheral resistance. But what we also see is that if angiotensin 2 binds to the adrenal cortex, so adrenal meaning the adrenal gland, cortex meaning the outermost part. So as the angiotensin 2 binds to the adrenal cortex there, it's then going to trigger the release of aldosterone. And aldosterone is going to activate active transport by these sodium-potassium ATPase pumps to reabsorb that sodium. And by reabsorbing that sodium, we're going to be reabsorbing water. And by reabsorbing that sodium and that water, we are increasing our blood volume, which will overall help to increase our blood pressure. Guys, I would expect you all to know and understand the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Okay, incredibly important, and I would highly recommend you really commit that to memory. Okay. What have we got here? What has Past Brock written here? Okay, basically what I've done here, looking at ADH, looking at aldosterone, all that, is that I've taken what I've mentioned over here. I really should shuffle this order, actually, now that I mention it. And I kind of go into just a little bit more depth. Okay, so like ADH, what does it do? It regulates this water reabsorption. How does it do it? Well, it's triggering the insertion of these aquaporins, which then allows more reabsorption of water through that collecting duct and distal convoluted tubule, which decreases the amount of water being lost as urine and thus increasing blood volume. Aldosterone, which we've just mentioned, we just spoke about. What it does is it's secreted as a response of angiotensin 2, so it needs to go through the full RAS conversion to get angiotensin 2, and then once angiotensin 2 binds to that adrenal cortex, of the adrenal gland just above the kidney, so it kind of sort of goes full circle, which is cool. That then triggers this reabsorption of sodium, which will allow water to move with it, increasing blood volume and blood pressure. Now, again, we need a way to turn this off. We need a way to disable this. Sorry guys, I actually did that very intentionally because I'm recording the audio separate, and I'm hoping if I have a sound sample, I can actually delete the chainsaw sound in the recordings. So if we want to disable these effects, what we can do is we can release atrial natriuretic peptide, ANP, which is triggered by the stretching of the atria in the heart as a response to an increase in blood pressure or an increase in blood flow there. Okay, that atria is stretching more and more and more, and the heart goes, all right, woo, steady on. We're good. We've got enough here. Let's stop frantically reabsorbing sodium and water and all of that. We're fine as we are. So again, I've summarized it again for you guys. I've summarized the summary so that you can have an extra summary. So I hope this sort of also goes to really take home the importance of the RAS system. Okay, now regulation of water gain. Individually here, all of these points I've kind of already discussed, but essentially what we have here is, if we do need more blood volume, okay, or if we are, dehydrated, like, we've been discussing for the past, hour plus, we need to increase water ingestion. We need to put more water in us. So what our body does is it sends us a message that goes, hey man, need some more fluids. Can you do something about that for me, please? And the main way it does that is the stimulation of these thirst centers. So what is happening here is that the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus will detect this change. Now, osmoreceptors, so osmolarity, so it's detecting essentially the amount of solutes that are dissolved in our solution, or in this case, our blood. And if it gets like more and more and more sort of salty, what that is telling you is, hey, this is getting more and more salty. We are losing water, or we are becoming more and more dehydrated. Can we please do something about that? It can also then be reinforced by things like angiotensin 2 being released due to this, drop in blood pressure. So what's going to happen is we can either have an increase in this osmolarity, which I've described to you guys when we were talking about, say, dehydration. And what that is going to do is it's going to trigger these osmoreceptors and say, hey guys, we are, we're getting a bit dehydrated here. Can we do something about this? And some of the things we're going to see is like a decrease in saliva, okay? We lose a lot of water in saliva, which is going to trigger dry mouth, which a dry mouth plus the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus are all going to activate this thirst center to say, hey, we're thirsty, go and get a drink. So what's going to happen there is that the hypothalamic thirst center is going to be triggered. You're going to go, oh man, yeah, you know what? I am quite parched. So you turn around like this person here, and you have a big drink of water. And what is going to happen there is that the water is going to moisten and line your throat. Your mouth will become rehydrated. So that will get rid of this sort of dry mouth, which will not sort of trigger this hypothalamic thirst center as much. You're going to absorb that water from your GI tract. It's then going to increase the amount of water in your blood plasma, which is going to decrease that osmolarity. It's going to make it less salty because you put more water in there, which is kind of the whole, that's the aim of the game with all of this. Now, I mentioned there was sort of a couple of ways to activate all of this. I've mentioned that ECF osmolarity, so if we're getting, say, super salty. Another thing here is plasma volume, okay? So if we lose that plasma volume, we get less of this blood pressure, which is detected by the kidneys. This is then going to fully trigger our RAS, okay? And that's going to then activate angiotensin 2, which is going to trigger this thirst center and say, hey, let's grab a drink. Let's increase that blood volume and increase that blood pressure. Okay, so there are two primary sort of things here when we're looking at the hormone effect on solutes. So what's important here is that I've been describing not only the reabsorption of water, but I've also been describing the reabsorption of various solutes, things like sodium and sodium-potassium exchange, okay? Things like that, which obviously does have a significant effect on how water is then reabsorbed into the body there. Another thing too is like if you have way too much salt, we can't just be frantically reabsorbing all of that. We need to sort of get rid of it. Whoops. So basically all I'm sort of trying to get at here, all I'm trying to sort of explain here is the effect that can happen if we have too much of these solutes, which obviously if we have too much or too little of these solutes, it can have a wide variety of different effects in the body, especially when it comes to sort of fluid exchange, fluid movement. It's important that we know about, especially the exchange of sodium and potassium, and looking at, controlling those levels. But it is much more important, and I will definitely be focusing a lot more on water. I've already described all of this. I've also described all of this. One thing that can happen too is that you can have a thing called water intoxication. Now, I explained that in not really, in when we were talking about tonicity, and if you were to put, say, pure water into your blood, it would cause a huge cause your red blood cells to explode, because all that water would go rushing in. It can't hold it. It's the same deal with water intoxication, where you drink death by water consumption. You basically drink way too much water. It is obviously quite rare, but it has happened. Okay. Right. What are we saying here, guys? What are we doing? What are we looking at here? I've kind of thrown myself out of order a little bit because I went on a massive tangent at the beginning and kind of already explained a lot of this stuff. So, movement of water into the cells, movement of water out of the cells, all that sort of stuff. To just rewind a huge amount, that's what I was talking about here. Okay, this diagram was a little bit a little bit more simplistic, I guess. Whereas these slides over here are explaining it a little bit more. So what this is saying here is that huge amounts of water can lead to this water intoxication. Again, if you have a stupidly high amount. It's also important for athletes who do need to consume a whole heck of a lot of water. What's really important there is that it's one thing to just consume all that water, but by sweating as well, you're losing a lot of those electrolytes. You're losing a lot of those, dissolved solutes, in your body. So this is why for athletes, they might not only be drinking, say, a thing of water, but they will also be consuming, sports drinks or, like these Gatorades and Powerades and. I'm sure we've all seen those ads. It's like, new Gatorade with added electrolytes for extra performance. What does that mean? Guys, they put salt in it. That's what they did. They added some salt. They put some sodium and some chlorine in there. And that is what they mean when they say these big power words, the electrolytes. Yeah, it's just these dissolved salts, which for the everyday person is not super important. You're not, like me sitting right now at my desk, teaching you lovely people about the kidneys and water balance. I'm not sitting there going like, damn, I need my electrolytes right now. This is ridiculous. If, however, I was Rafael Nadal, and I've just played like 5 sets in the finals, in 40-degree heat. Yeah, you probably would, because you just the amount of water and salt you would lose in that high physical exertion. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the composition of these different fluids, especially when it comes to these ions here. Now, I have already shown you this graph here, and am I going to expect you to learn these raw values? Absolutely not. That is just silly. But what I would expect you guys to know is just to have a general idea on whereabouts we find these these key ions here. So for instance, sodium, we primarily find that outside of the cell. Okay, we find that in the interstitial fluid and in our plasma. Potassium is the opposite. We find maybe a little bit in the blood and a little bit in the interstitial fluid, but a whole heck of a lot, most of it, is in our intracellular fluid. Now, why is it important that we need to know that with sodium and potassium? Because that's very important with our action potentials. Okay, and looking at our resting membrane potential. And we spoke a lot about that with sodium and potassium and calcium a little bit as well when we were looking at the action potentials of skeletal muscle and our cardiomyocytes and our pacemaker cells. They're the 3 main ones that I would expect, and obviously too our protein anions. So an anion, just for your awareness, anion means something that is negatively charged. So we typically see protein and ions in the blood plasma, which again makes sense. That's what we learned when we were doing our bulk flow and looking at how we can reabsorb some water or move it from the interstitial space back into our capillary. Okay, that's coming from here. And we also have it intracellular, and that's the main place where we find our proteins there. Oh, there you go. I'm a bit of a mind reader. That's exactly what I just said there. Now, ion absorption versus ion secretion. Again, it's a big balancing act, and it's the same what we did with water. Water absorption versus water secretion, and moving it around into different compartments in the body. It's exactly the same when it comes to our various ions. However, we can sort of store them in things like bones, especially. So we can absorb these ions in our GIT, through our diet. We can reabsorb it there, and we can also, if we do have too much, we can excrete it. We can remove it via our sweat glands or the kidneys as urine. Now, kidneys and losing those ions as urine is the main source of this of removing excess ions. However, if you're really sweaty, and I'm sure this has happened to everyone, you're really sweaty and you're doing like playing some kind of sport, and then a drop of sweat goes in your eye, and you're like, I can't see, it burns. Yeah, it's because it's salty. It's because it's one of the ways in which we are releasing those various ions. Now, look, sodium and potassium here. This is just sort of a very brief recap, but we have already discussed this extensively when we were looking at the heart and looking at action potentials. Now, sodium is a big one. Sodium is incredibly important that we that we balance out and we control those levels. So if you do have abnormal plasma K levels, so K is potassium, it's kalium, so that's the original name for potassium. It has a really big effect if we have an imbalance there on triggering action potentials, especially when it comes to the heart and neuromuscular functions. So you can have hypokalemia, which is low potassium levels, and we have hyperkalemia, which is far too high. Now, both of them, very high or very low, are incredibly dangerous / life-threatening. So to put this in perspective, hyperkalemia, for instance, that's what the lethal injection is. They essentially, administer a sedative and a muscle relaxant, and then they give a injection of potassium chloride. And yeah, what that does is it just destroys your muscle's ability to be able to create this resting membrane potential and generate action potentials, and it just stops your heart from beating. And hypokalemia is equally as dangerous, and something my dear mother has. So it's less than 3 is considered life-threatening. She dropped down to 2.2 at one point, so that was terrifying. But and she actually did notice a lot of these symptoms. She started to get these weird cardiac, these arrhythmias. She started to notice this fluttering, and then realized, oh wow, I should probably, go to the hospital. Thankfully, her levels are a little bit better now. We know the cause of it. But yeah, hypo and hyperkalemia are incredibly dangerous and incredibly risky because it essentially stops or can really affect your cell's ability to trigger action potentials and, maintain this the resting membrane potential. So yeah, it can be very, very dangerous. There you go. And that's what we're sort of describing there. So I'm sorry, I always laugh at normokalemia. Oh dear, that makes me laugh. Hyperkalemia, what that does is that it makes the resting membrane potential more positive, which basically means is that these cells are just so excitable, they just constrict and then they just never relax. Whereas hypokalemia is like that makes the resting membrane potential like super like lethargic. It's just like it's just so difficult to make these cells trigger an action potential and do what they're told. Look, chloride, calcium, I'm super not going to talk about here. The big thing here when we're looking at some of these like electrolyte imbalances, so I've spoken sort of, hyper and hypokalemia, looking at sodium and sodium retention, that can really lead to water retention, and swelling can lead to things like edema and stuff like that. But I'm not really going to dig deep and sort of go further into any of these electrolyte imbalances. Now, let us have a look. Uh-oh. No, there we go. Never mind. We're back. We're good. Let us now have a look at acids, bases, and what a buffer system is. Now, we have already done a whole heck of a lot with this, which is just fantastic. So, what is pH? Okay, pH is essentially a measurement of hydrogen concentration. Okay, and what it does is that it is how willingly or how the ability of a molecule to donate a hydrogen ion. Is that super important? Yeah, a little bit. But what is the big takeaway message here is that as we get higher up here with the smaller numbers, we're getting more and more acidic, which again we're all aware of when we were looking at the lungs. I realize I've disappeared for a while, guys. I'm so sorry. So with this acid-base balance, it's incredibly important to maintain your body's pH. Now, there's all these fad diets and all these fad people trying to sell you stuff saying, you need to detox, you need to normalize your body's pH, you're too acidic. Nonsense. Okay, your body is exceptionally good at controlling your plasma and your blood pH. Your GIT, that pH, controlling your stomach's pH and stuff like that, that's a different story. But inside of your body, yeah, we control it exceptionally well. And the reason for that is due to our proteins. Proteins are very sensitive to changes in pH. I mean, that's one of the main ways in which we denature or break down proteins in our stomach. Which that's fine if you're munching on, a big T-bone steak. However, if you're relying on these very delicate and sensitive proteins to, maintain these, important chemical reactions in your body and, keep you alive, it's crucial. They are very, very sensitive to it. Now, there are three major systems here that we use to regulate our blood pH. Now, we have already spoken about one of these, and that's this one. We've already mentioned the exhalation of carbon dioxide. Okay, that was that the carbonic acid, that carbonic anhydrase thing, where we had carbon dioxide and water, and that then converted to carbonic acid, which then changed to that hydrogen and bicarbonate. So we've already actually looked at that one in reasonable depth. The next ones we're going to look at are these two, but again, we're going to keep that sort of quite brief. I guess the next thing I really want to explain now is what is a buffer. So a buffer is something that is able to act as both an acid and a base, and it helps to resist a change in something. Now, that's obviously very confusing. So I'm going to try and explain it using... oh, geez. Okay, bear with me. I'm going to try and explain this using my hands. Yeah, let's. Oh god, let's try this. Okay, I have two coasters here. Now I am a buffer. Now what that means is that in respect to acids and bases, an acid is something that will donate or get rid of a coaster. A base is a hydrogen acceptor. This is something that is going to want to pick up and accept a coaster. So if I'm a buffer, what that is essentially saying is, let's say I have one coaster, but I have the ability to hold two. If suddenly our pH gets very low, we get very acidic, I can help counter that and go, oh hey, well we got a lot of coasters here. I'm just going to temporarily hold on to this one. And then let's say if it then swings the other way and we go, hey, well, we have no coasters. It's like, oh, okay, I've got a coaster here. There we go. And no, we're still running out. Okay, I've got another coaster here. Here we go. I now have no more coasters. So basically what that means is that by me being able to hold on to coasters and get rid of the coasters depending on our need, what that means is that we are able to stabilize our coaster demand. Now, moving away from bloody coasters, because that's a weird analogy, relating that to acids and bases and relating that to our body's pH. If our body gets suddenly more acidic, what these buffers can do is they can hold on to those hydrogen ions and just sort of help to stabilize it. And then when we say get a little bit more alkaline, what our body can do is go, hey, okay, well, we're getting a little bit more alkaline, and we'll get donate and get rid of those hydrogen ions to just, instead of having big spikes up, down, up, down, up, down, it will sort of just level it out. So that's what a buffer is. This one, there we go. Now, buffer systems, this is what I've literally just described to you guys. Look, so one thing I didn't mention is speed. Not that that's really important for you guys. You guys don't really delve further into detail in terms of reaction rates. But I guess it's kind of worth knowing that acid-base reactions are one of the fastest chemical reactions that we see. They are incredibly, incredibly quick. Now, some of these buffers, what we have here is we do have chemical ones, we have physiological ones. Now, what do we mean by physiological ones? So with the respiratory system, what we could do there is that, CO2 and water would make, carbonic acid. That's what we saw over here. But then with your lungs, by exhaling and by getting rid of that CO2, you are getting rid of that acidity. So that's one way, sort of physiologically, we can control it. The renal system, what can we do there? Well, we can actually, in the nephron there, especially in the DCT, the distal convoluted tubules, we can say, okay, let's get rid of hydrogens. Let's pump hydrogens out of the body into that filtrate, so that when it goes down into the collecting duct, it is then excreted. Or vice versa, if we find our blood, is too alkaline, we can take these bicarbonate ions that we see down here, and then exchange those and put that into the filtrate and release it as waste in the urine there. So that's physiologically how the renal system is really, really, really useful for controlling our blood pH. Now, the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system, I've already explained to that. We've already looked at how this is formed. So by CO2 and H2O, how that forms this carbonic acid and creates this bicarbonate ion. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we've already done it. We already did it in the lungs. Look, the protein buffer system, super not interested in, don't bother. That's getting again more complicated, more intricate. I don't expect you guys to know how amino acids can act as an acid or a base. It also super doesn't help that this image is wrong. It shouldn't be NH2, it should be NH3, and this should be O-, not OH. So don't bother at the moment with protein buffer systems. All I would expect you to know is that proteins can act as a buffer, and that's it. I'm happy with that. I don't want to sort of... As much as it hurts my dear heart to say this, I don't want to bog you guys down with too much chemistry. Now the respiratory buffer, this is what I was explaining before with, exhalation of CO2. Okay. If you're breathing out more, you're exhaling more CO2, then it means, fewer and fewer of those, carbonic acids are being formed. That's what we're looking at over here, which means it's less acidic. Now, the renal buffer. Again, that's what I was explaining before. Sorry, guys, I've sort of just explained all of these slides in one hit. It's just at the nephron, we can sort of choose to excrete or release, hydrogens or bicarbonate ions. We can choose to either kick them out or absorb them back in. Now, we do have... let's go up here. There are some disorders here that involve disruptions to this acid-base balance. So one is metabolic acidosis. So, that is, causing sort of an increase in generation of organic acids in the body. So things like, diabetes and alcoholism and stuff like that can create more of these acids, which will obviously make your body more acidic. There are also some medications and drugs that are acidic. Things like, vitamin C is acidic, and aspirin is slightly acidic and stuff like that. Respiratory acidosis is another one. If you say hold your breath for too long, okay, or if you sort of hyperventilate too much, okay. So like respiratory alkalosis, if you inhale and exhale like far too much, you pass out. And of course, our body is exceptionally good at controlling and balancing your body's pH, because it is it can cause some serious effects. Because if your say body gets too acidic and you start to get systemic acidosis or something like that, where your body is just way too acidic, your proteins can start to denature. Now, if they partially denature, if they denature a little bit, our bodies might be able to repair it, to refold them up and to sort of help them out. But if we completely denature a protein, it's gone. Like you can't fix it. It's like saying to me, "Can you please uncook an egg?" It's that kind of thing. You can't uncook an egg, and it's the same with a protein that's completely denatured. You can't refold it. So it can be very, very harmful to the body, but fortunately our body is exceptionally good at controlling these factors. All right, guys, so what we've done today, we've looked at the 2/3 major body fluid compartments. We've looked at how they not communicate together, but how they sort of exchange fluid from one to the other. We've looked at the main hormones that control water and electrolyte balances. And we've looked at the importance of your body controlling that blood pressure and blood volume, and how these hormonal mechanisms are activated and how they work, especially in the nephron or in the body as a whole, as mainly referring to RAS, how sort of more systemic effects there. Explain the physiological importance of major electrolytes. We did that a little bit, but I mainly linked that to stuff that we had done in previous modules. As I've said, things like, looking at that resting membrane potential and action potentials and stuff like that. And of course, we recapped as well on the importance of pH and how our bodies can then control our pH. Oh, I'm a bit blurry. Come on, there. Ooh. There we go. Oh dear. Look, guys, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm very sorry about the whole chainsaw noise thing. Of course, as we conclude our class today, it appears that they have stopped, but that is what it is. Look, again, thank you all very much for joining along today. I will see you all hopefully tomorrow for our tutorial, in which we will recap a lot of this stuff and we will have a bit of a chat about your end of trimester exam. But on that note, guys, study hard, do your best. If you do have any questions or issues or concerns or anything like that, please just send me an email or get in touch. I'm more than happy to help you out. Other than that, have a lovely day, guys, and I will see you all tomorrow.